38 years in civil engineering teaches you one thing above everything else. The most dangerous failures are never sudden. They're slow. A hairline fracture in a concrete pier, a slight settlement in the soil that nobody bothered to measure. You walk past it every day and you think, that's fine. That's always been there. And then one morning you come in and the whole span has shifted 6 inches and you're standing there wondering how you missed it. I didn't miss anything with my family. I saw every crack. I just kept telling myself it was fine. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 41 years building something, a career, a home, a family, and I did it the way I did everything else, methodically, without complaint, with the assumption that the people around me saw what I was putting in and valued it accordingly. My wife and I met when I was 24 and she was 22. We were married within the year. We had 2 children, a son, then a daughter. I worked. She managed the household when the kids were young, then went back to work part-time when they were in school. We weren't a perfect family, but we were a functional one. Or so I believed. The house was in Oakville, Ontario. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard that backed onto a greenbelt. I bought it in 1991 for $312,000 and put everything I had into maintaining it. New roof in 2003, kitchen renovation in 2008. A proper deck in 2011 that my son helped me build over 3 weekends, back when he still had weekends to spare and seemed to want to spend them with me. My son married young. She was a woman his age, from a family I never quite understood. Not unkind people, but people who moved through life with a particular assumption that comfort was something owed to them, not earned. My son absorbed this slowly, the way water gets into concrete. You don't notice until the freeze comes and everything cracks open. My daughter took longer to marry. She was independent, career-focused, and I was proud of her for it. When she did find someone, I thought he was steady. He was an account manager at a logistics firm in Mississauga. Presentable, polite in the way people are polite when they want something. I retired at 62. Not because I had to, I was still sharp, still useful, but because my wife had been asking me to for 2 years and I thought, we've earned this. I had a defined benefit pension from 31 years with the same engineering firm, topped up by CPP, topped up by a registered retirement savings account I had been adding to since I was 27. We were comfortable, more than comfortable. That was the word I kept using, comfortable. I didn't understand yet that comfort, when you share it with people who haven't learned to generate their own, becomes a target. It started small, the way it always does. My son and his wife had bought a townhouse in Burlington. It was within their means when they bought it, but then she stopped working, not because of children, just because she had decided she didn't enjoy her job, and suddenly their means had narrowed considerably. The first time my son called to ask if we could help with a shortfall, I said yes without hesitation. $1,100. I told my wife, it's once. They'll get sorted. It was not once. Over the following 3 years, I gave my son and his wife somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000. I kept records because that's who I am, but I stopped showing my wife the running total because I could see what it was doing to her expression every time I mentioned it. Not anger at me, something more complicated, a resignation. My daughter and her husband were subtler. They didn't ask directly. They moved into a condo in Etobicoke. That was, by any reasonable measure, more than they could afford, and then they invited us to dinners at restaurants I would never have chosen. And somehow the bill always landed near me. A weekend in Niagara-on-the-Lake for my wife's birthday. Our treat, Dad, don't worry. And then I found the charge on my visa because my daughter had quietly handed my card to the server while I was in the washroom. $1,240. She never mentioned it. Neither did I. I told myself these things happened in families, that money moved around, that I was lucky to have it and fortunate to share it. My wife knew better. She tried to tell me once sitting at the kitchen table in February of the year before everything changed. She said, they're not going to stop, you know, not until there's nothing left. I told her she was being uncharitable. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she picked up her tea and went to watch television, and we didn't speak about it again. She was right. She was almost always right. and I was almost always too stubborn to say so. In March, I had a health scare, not dramatic, no sirens, no collapse, a persistent tightness in my chest that I ignored for 4 days before my wife made me call the doctor. The doctor sent me directly to the Oakville Trafalgar Memorial Emergency Department, and the tests came back showing something they wanted to look at more closely. I was admitted overnight. An echocardiogram, a stress test, a cardiologist with a careful voice who explained that I had a significant blockage in my left anterior descending artery that required intervention. The procedure was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Minimally invasive, they said, angioplasty with a stent. The cardiologist told me the success rate was high, the risks were low, but that I needed someone with me for the procedure and for the first 48 hours afterward. My wife called my son. He said he'd try to make it work, but that his wife had her spin class Tuesday morning, and they were doing dinner with her parents Tuesday evening, and it was complicated. My wife said, "Your father is having a cardiac procedure. I need you here." He said he would see what he could do. He did not come. My daughter's husband, my son-in-law, the account manager with the steady handshake, was celebrating his 40th birthday that Tuesday, not the actual birthday, that was in April. But they had decided to hold the party on that particular Tuesday because a venue had been available at a reduced rate and most of their friends had been able to confirm. My daughter called my wife at 7:30 in the morning, 2 hours before I was scheduled to go into the catheterization lab, and said she wasn't going to be able to come because she had 40 guests arriving at 7 that evening and there was still so much to do. My wife said, "He could die today." My daughter said, "Mom, the doctor said it's low risk. You're with him, aren't you? You'll call me if anything changes." My wife handed me the phone. I don't know why. I didn't take it. I lay there in the hospital gown, listening to my daughter's voice coming out of the speaker, and I felt something settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the blocked artery. The procedure went well. I was in recovery by noon. My wife sat beside me for 6 hours without eating anything, without complaining, without asking anyone to come relieve her. At 4 in the afternoon, she got a text from my son saying he hoped things had gone okay and asking if we needed anything. She showed me the text and didn't say a word. At 7:15 that evening, my daughter sent a photo. 40 people in a private room at a restaurant in Mississauga. My son-in-law in a blazer, holding a glass of wine, grinning at the camera. She had captioned it, "The birthday boy. Love you so much, babe." Ha. I looked at that photograph for a long time. I was kept overnight for observation. The next morning, the cardiologist came by and told me the stent was well placed and the blood flow was good, and that I should expect to feel significantly better within a few weeks. He gave me a list of lifestyle modifications and a prescription for 2 new medications. He told me to take it easy and to make sure I had support at home. My wife drove me home. My son came by 3 days later on a Saturday for about 45 minutes. He brought a grocery store card and flowers that were already drooping slightly at the tips. He sat at the kitchen table, drank a coffee, mentioned twice that his wife sent her love, and left. My daughter texted to say the party had been a great success and asked how I was feeling, and when I said I was tired and still quite sore, she said she'd try to visit soon. She visited 11 days later for an hour and 20 minutes. She was on her way to something else. I spent those weeks sitting in my study at the desk I had used for every financial and professional document of my adult life, and I thought, I have always been a methodical thinker. I don't decide things in anger. I sit with fact. The fact was this. My children had been given every advantage I could provide. Education, down payment assistance, regular injections of cash during thin times. The house they had both grown up in, which I had maintained and improved for 3 decades, and which was currently worth, according to the most recent comparable sales in the area, just under $2 million. My pension and savings were sufficient to last my wife and me comfortably for the rest of our natural lives, with a substantial remainder. That remainder was what my children were waiting for. I understood this now with the clarity that the cardiologist had promised would come. Not waiting with malice, maybe, but waiting with certainty, the way people wait for weather that's already been forecast. I called my financial advisor on a Thursday morning. His office was in downtown Toronto, but he was happy to do the call by video. I had used him for 19 years. He is the kind of man who does not ask unnecessary questions, but who listens very carefully to the ones you do ask. I asked a lot of questions that morning. The following Monday, I called my solicitor. She had handled the purchase of our home, 2 wills, and a minor property dispute with a neighbour in 2014. I asked her to prepare documents for a significant restructuring of my assets. She asked if I was under any pressure or duress. I told her I was not. I told her I had never been clearer about anything in my life. She said she would have a draft ready within 2 weeks. In the meantime, I said nothing to my wife, not because I was hiding it from her. I have never hidden anything from my wife, but because I needed to know the shape of what I was building before I showed it to her. You don't show someone a blueprint with blank spaces. You finish it first. What I was building, in the most straightforward terms, was this. I was separating what my family needed from what my children expected to inherit. My wife and I would be fully protected, better than fully protected. I restructured the account so that everything was jointly held in a trust that passed directly to her on my death, without touching the estate, without requiring probate, without passing through any process my children could challenge or delay. I moved the Oakville house into the same structure. My solicitor explained the options clearly. I chose the cleanest one. Then I set up a donor-advised fund at Community Foundation in Hamilton. I had always meant to do more charitable giving. My wife had been saying so for years. The remaining investment assets, the ones beyond what we conservatively needed for 30 more years of living, went there. The fund would disperse to organizations we had always supported. A hospice in Burlington, a food bank in Oakville, a scholarship fund at the college where I had done my first 2 years before transferring to Waterloo. My children would inherit at my death the personal effects in the house and whatever residual amount remained in a specific account I had set aside for that purpose. A fair amount, not nothing, but not the windfall they had been banking on. Not the $2 million house, not the investment portfolio. I told my wife on a Saturday afternoon in October, sitting at the kitchen table with the actual documents in front of her. She read everything twice. She asked 2 questions. The first was whether this was what I actually wanted, not just what I was angry enough to do. The second was whether we had enough. I answered yes to both. She nodded slowly. Then she said, I should have pushed harder in February. I told her she had said exactly what needed to be said. She just smiled in the tired way she has when she considers a matter closed. I called my son on a Monday evening. I told him I had restructured my estate planning and that I wanted him to know before he heard it another way. I explained the broad strokes. I did not apologize. I said that his mother and I were well provided for and that I hoped he and his wife would find their footing going forward. There was a long silence. Then he said, Dad, why would you do that? We're your family. I said, Yes, you are. Another silence. He said his wife was going to be very upset. I said I understood. He said he needed to talk to his sister. I said that was fine. He said he thought maybe we should all sit down and discuss this. I said there was nothing to discuss, as the documents were already filed, but that I was happy to have dinner. We have not had dinner. My daughter called 20 minutes after I hung up with my son. She was not crying, which surprised me. She was composed in the clipped, efficient way she gets when she is managing something she considers a problem to be solved. She said she didn't think it was fair. I asked her to tell me specifically what wasn't fair. She said that she and her husband had made financial decisions based on certain expectations, and that changing the situation now was, and she paused here, choosing her word, destabilizing. I said, when I was in the catheterization lab in March, were you thinking about what was destabilizing to me? She didn't answer that. I told her I loved her. I told her that nothing about my love for her had changed, and nothing about my intention to be present in her life had changed. I told her that money was a different matter and that she was young and capable and more than able to build her own security. I told her I believed that completely. She said she had to go and thus she'd call later. It's been 4 months. She hasn't called. My son-in-law's 40th birthday party photograph is still on my daughter's social media. I have looked at it a handful of times since. 40 people in a warm room, holding glasses, smiling. My daughter in the foreground, radiant, her husband with his arm around her. I was in a hospital room 12 kilometers away. My wife was in the chair beside my bed. I was wearing a gown that opened at the back, and I had a pressure bandage on my wrist where they had run the catheter, and I was thinking about how you miss the slow failures, the ones that accumulate so gradually that by the time the movement is visible, it has already become structural. I don't miss them anymore. My wife and I spent 3 weeks in Nova Scotia this past August. We rented a house near Mahone Bay, a small place, unpretentious, with a wood stove and a view of the water. We ate lobster 3 times. We walked every morning. In the evenings, we sat on the back porch and listened to the water and talked the way we hadn't talked in years, without the low-grade static of managing everyone else's needs humming beneath every conversation. She said one evening, watching the light change over the bay, "I didn't know it could be this quiet." I knew what she meant, not just the sound, the whole thing, the quiet of not waiting to be needed, not bracing for the next ask, not measuring out my goodwill in careful increments hoping it would last. I had spent 40 years building structures designed to bear weight. I know what a sound foundation feels like. I know the difference between something that will hold and something that just looks like it will. What my wife and I have built, just the two of us, has always been the real thing. I just needed everything else to fall away before I could see it clearly. The water was very still that evening, the kind of still that means the weather will hold. I put my arm around my wife and she leaned her head on my shoulder, and I thought, this is what I worked for. Not the house in Oakville, not the portfolio, not the expectation in my children's eyes every time they calculated the distance between now and their inheritance. This, just this. The foundation is sound. I checked it myself. There's a moment, somewhere between the anesthetic wearing off and the fluorescent lights coming back into focus, when you see things without the usual interference. No noise, no obligation, just what's actually there. What was actually there in my case was a chair, my wife in it, and nothing else. I've spent a lot of time thinking about cause and effect since that day, not in a bitter way, but in the way a structural engineer thinks about load distribution. Every outcome has a history. The crack in the pier didn't appear the morning the bridge failed. It was there in year 2, year 5, year 12. You just kept signing off on the inspection reports because everything looked fine from the road. My son didn't decide not to come to the hospital that Tuesday on a whim. That decision had been accumulating for years. In every shortfall I covered without condition, every boundary I softened because I didn't want to create conflict, every time I chose their comfort over my own honest assessment of what was happening, I taught him, 3 years of consistent action, that my needs were negotiable. I can't pretend otherwise. My daughter is a capable, intelligent woman. I still believe that. But intelligence without honesty is just a sharper tool for avoiding the things you don't want to face. She knew what she was doing when she left that morning to manage her guest list. She made a calculation. She weighed her husband's party against her father's procedure, and she chose the party, and she found a way to feel reasonable about it. That took a particular kind of moral flexibility that I had, in some ways, made it easy for her to develop. That's the hardest part to sit with. Not what they did, what I allowed to grow unchecked because I thought generosity was the same thing as love. It isn't. Generosity without honesty isn't love. It's avoidance with better optics. What I did in those weeks after the procedure, the calls with my advisor, the restructuring, the documents my solicitor filed, that wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that. Revenge is reactive. What I did was corrective. I looked at the structure I had built and I made it sound. I stopped designing for who I hoped my children were and started designing for who they had shown me they were. My wife sat in that chair for 6 hours without eating. That's the data point I keep returning to. Not as a comparison, not to assign grades, but because it told me something true about what endures. The things that hold are the things built with actual integrity, not the things held together by expectation, proximity, and the quiet understanding that someone will always cover the gap. I don't know what my children will do with the life I've given them to build on their own. I hope they find their footing. I genuinely do. But that work belongs to them now, not to me. I'm 63 years old, and I have a wife who sat in a chair for 6 hours and a view of Mahone Bay that I intend to earn every single morning I wake up to it. The foundation, as I said, is sound. I checked it myself.